Jessica Palmer, 34, stared at the eviction notice taped to her door, the one her own parents had served her. "You have 48 hours to get your stuff out. Your sister owns that house now." The text message from her father burned on her phone screen. 10 years of sacrifice of paying her parents' mortgage while they lived rent-free in Florida, and this was her reward. Little did they know what I discovered in Dad's old filing cabinet last night. She thought her hands trembling as she unlocked a safety deposit box that would change everything. Hey everyone, before I dive deeper into the most devastating betrayal of my life, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and if this family revenge drama already has you hooked, please hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you'll want to see how karma came back for my family in ways none of us could have imagined. For as long as I could remember, I had been the responsible one in our family. While my younger sister Melissa partied through college with our parents footing the bill, I had taken a different path. I graduated with honors, landed a stable job at an accounting firm, and started building what I thought was a secure future. My parents had always preached financial responsibility, and I took those lessons to heart. When they approached me 10 years ago about helping with the family home, it seemed like the perfect arrangement. Mom and Dad were retiring to Florida, and they needed someone to maintain their cherished Victorian house in Massachusetts, where we'd all grown up. The agreement was simple. I would pay the mortgage and maintenance costs, and eventually the house would be mine. They even drafted a simple contract stating their intention to transfer ownership after the mortgage was paid off. It wasn't notarized or legally binding, but I trusted my parents' word. After all, they had raised me to believe that family promises were sacred. "Jessica, you've always been so responsible," my mother had said, her hand resting on mine across the kitchen table. "We know you'll take good care of our home, and one day it will be yours." For 10 years, I poured everything into that house. Beyond the $1,800 monthly mortgage payments, I invested nearly $45 0-inches renovations. I replaced the aging roof, modernized the kitchen with my own savings, and lovingly restored the original hardwood floors. Every decision I made was with long-term ownership in mind. I planted maple trees that would take decades to mature, installed a high-efficiency heating system, and even converted the basement into a cozy home office where I worked remotely 3 days a week. My social life took a back seat to my financial commitments. While friends my age were traveling or advancing their careers in different cities, I remained rooted to my childhood home, bound by responsibility and promise. Dating became complicated when I had to explain my unusual living arrangement, technically living in my parents' house, but paying for everything. More than one relationship fizzled when potential partners questioned why I would pour so much money into a property I didn't legally own. "You're being taken advantage of," my last boyfriend, Mark, had warned before we broke up. "Get something in writing, Jessica. People change, even family." I dismissed his concerns. My parents wouldn't betray me. We spoke weekly on their scheduled Sunday calls, where they'd inquire about the house, ask about minor repairs, and reminisce about family memories created within those walls. They seemed genuinely grateful for my caretaking. Meanwhile, my relationship with Melissa remained complicated. 5 years younger than me, she had always been the favored child, vibrant, social, and unencumbered by the sense of duty that defined my existence. After graduating with a degree in communications funded entirely by our parents, she moved to Los Angeles to pursue a career in public relations. Her Instagram showcased a glamorous life of industry parties and beach sunsets, while I was posting photos of my garden and home improvement projects. Our parents never failed to mention Melissa's latest accomplishments during our calls. "Your sister just signed another major client," they'd gush, while my consistent mortgage payments were simply expected, rarely acknowledged. Last month, things began to change. My parents' Sunday calls became sporadic, with vague excuses about poor reception or being too busy. When we did connect, they seemed distracted, ending conversations abruptly. Then, Melissa posted photos of her visiting our parents in Florida, something unusual since she typically avoided family obligations. The three of them looked conspiratorial, huddled together over paperwork on their lanai cocktails in hand. I felt uneasy, but pushed aside my concerns. Perhaps they were planning a surprise for my upcoming birthday. Maybe they were finally preparing the paperwork to transfer the house into my name as promised. Then, yesterday, everything collapsed. I received a terse email from my father with an attached document. The subject line read simply, "Change of plans." Jessica, after much consideration, we've decided to sell the family house. Melissa has expressed interest in purchasing it as an investment property. Given her financial success, she's in a position to give us a fair market price, which we need for our retirement. We know this isn't what we initially discussed, but circumstances change. You'll need to vacate the property within 48 hours. Melissa's real estate agent needs access to prepare for listing photographs. I read the email 3 times, unable to process the betrayal. 10 years of payments, improvements, and sacrifice dismissed in a 5-sentence email. I immediately called my parents, but they didn't answer. I called Melissa, but her number went straight to voicemail. In desperation, I texted my father, reminding him of our agreement, the decade of payments, my understanding that the house would be mine. His response arrived within minutes. "You have 48 hours to get your stuff out. Your sister owns that house now." As the reality sank in, I realized I had no legal recourse. The informal agreement we'd made a decade ago wouldn't stand up in court. Everything I had invested financially and emotionally was gone. I sat in the kitchen where I'd shared countless family meals, where I'd believed in the security of family bonds, and felt my world crumbling around me. Little did I know that this devastating betrayal was just the beginning of a story that would eventually bring both justice and unexpected redemption. That night, sleep evaded me. The weight of betrayal pressed against my chest as I paced through the rooms of what I had long considered my home. Each corner held memories, family Christmases, my high school graduation celebration, quiet Sunday mornings with coffee and a book in the window seat. How could they dismiss 10 years of my life so easily? How could Melissa, my own sister, conspire to take away my home? Around 3 a.m., desperate for anything that might help my case, I remembered my father's old filing cabinet in the basement. Before moving to Florida, he had left behind a heavy metal cabinet filled with unimportant papers he hadn't wanted to transport. Just old tax returns and house records, he'd said casually. Nothing worth shipping, but maybe someday you'll need to reference the home's history. The basement was chilly as I descended the stairs, my phone, flashlight illuminating the path. The filing cabinet stood in the corner, gathering dust. I had never bothered to look through it, respecting my father's privacy even in his absence. But tonight, desperation overrode courtesy. The top drawer contained exactly what my father had described: ancient tax returns, utility bills from the 1,990 instruction manuals for appliances long replaced. The second drawer held insurance policies, warranties, and medical records. Nothing useful. As I pulled open the bottom drawer, something different emerged. This drawer contained a hanging file labeled Property Records that seemed more organized with subsections for different addresses. Confused, I sat cross-legged on the cold concrete floor and began examining the contents. What I found stunned me. Beyond our family home, there were records for 5 other properties I had never known about. Properties in Vermont, New Hampshire, and even one in the Carolinas. Properties purchased, renovated, and sold over the past 15 years, generating substantial profits. Based on the documentation, my parents had amassed nearly $1, $2 million in real estate transactions that they had never mentioned. But the true shock came from a manila envelope labeled Jessica's Trust. Inside was a legal document establishing a trust in my name on my 18th birthday, a trust funded with $175,000 from my maternal grandmother's estate. According to the paperwork, the money had been specifically designated for my education and first home purchase. There was also a letter from my grandmother sealed but addressed to me that had clearly never been delivered. With trembling hands, I opened the letter dated just weeks before my grandmother's death when I was 17. My dearest Jessica, by the time you read this, I will be gone, but I want you to know how proud I am of the responsible young woman you've become. You remind me so much of myself, practical, hardworking, and loyal to a fault. These qualities will serve you well, but they may also lead others to take advantage of your generous nature. To protect you, I've left you a gift $175,000 to secure your education and help you purchase your first home. This money is yours alone, not to be borrowed against or used by your parents for any purpose. I've made this clear in my will and to your parents. I must be honest about something that may be painful to hear. Your parents' approach to money has always concerned me. They present an image of financial propriety, but behind this facade lies impulsive spending and questionable ethics. I fear they may someday try to access what I've left for you. If you're reading this, I hope that means they respected my wishes. Trust your instincts, my dear girl. Remember that real family supports your independence rather than relying on your sacrifice. With eternal love, Grandma Eleanor. I sat frozen, the letter clutched in my hands as the implications washed over me. The trust my grandmother had established for me, my trust had vanished. The money had never been mentioned, never been made available to me for college or housing. Instead, I'd worked multiple jobs through university, graduated with $42, 0 inches student loans, and spent 10 years paying a mortgage on a house my parents had just given to my sister. Further investigation of the file revealed transfer documents showing that 3 months after my grandmother's death, the trust had been emptied. The signatures authorizing the transfers matched my parents' handwriting perfectly, but the signature purporting to be mine was an obvious forgery. I had never seen these papers, never authorized any transfers, and certainly never received any funds. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. Not only had my parents stolen my inheritance, but they had also manipulated me into paying for their mortgage while planning to sell the house out from under me all along. As dawn broke, I sat surrounded by papers documenting decades of deception. The family I thought I knew, the parents I had trusted implicitly, were strangers to me now. Through my tears, however, a different emotion began to emerge: determination. I carefully gathered the most important documents, placed them in a folder, and made a decision. I would not leave this house without a fight, and I would need professional help to ensure justice was served. With shaking hands but resolute purpose, I reached for my phone and began searching for lawyers specializing in estate fraud and financial elder abuse. The path ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in my life, I was ready to stand up against my family's betrayal. By 7 a.m., I had made an emergency appointment with Eleanor Reeves, a lawyer specializing in estate fraud. Her firm's website mentioned her success in recovering misappropriated trust funds, and she had availability that very morning, a stroke of luck in my rapidly deteriorating situation. Before heading to her office, I spent an hour methodically photographing every document I'd discovered, uploading them to a secure cloud storage account, and making physical copies at the 24-hour print shop downtown. "This is substantial," Eleanor said, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she examined the trust documents spread across her polished mahogany desk. A woman in her 60s, with silver hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, she reminded me a bit of my grandmother. The forgery of your signature is particularly egregious. And this has been going on for how long? 17 years, I replied, my voice hollow. I'm 34 now. The trust was established when I turned 18. Eleanor removed her glasses, fixing me with a direct gaze. Miss Palmer, I don't typically make promises during initial consultations, but in this case, I'm confident we have a strong legal position. What your parents did was not just unethical, it was criminal. Forging your signature to drain a trust, established explicitly for your benefit, constitutes fraud, and the statute of limitations for this type of fraud begins when the crime is discovered, not when it was committed. Hope flickered faintly. So I could recover the money, even after all these years. Potentially more than just the original amount, she nodded. With interest and penalties, the figure could be substantially higher. And given that they've continued the pattern of deception with this house situation, we could make a compelling case for additional damages. I hesitated. They're still my parents, and Melissa is my sister. I don't want to destroy them. Eleanor's expression softened slightly. I understand family complications, Jessica. But consider this, they had no such reservations about harming you. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for ourselves and ultimately for those who've wronged us is to establish boundaries and consequences. By noon, we had developed a two-pronged strategy. First, Eleanor would file an emergency injunction, preventing my parents from selling the house or evicting me until the court could review the evidence of financial malfeasance. Second, she would initiate proceedings to recover the misappropriated trust funds with interest. What about my sister? I asked, remembering Melissa's role in the current situation. That depends, Eleanor replied. Was she aware of the trust? Is there evidence of her knowledge or participation in the fraud? I considered the question carefully. I don't know if she knew about the original trust, but she's definitely involved in trying to take the house now. The email mentioned her purchasing it as an investment property. Then we include her in the temporary restraining order regarding the property, Eleanor decided. If evidence emerges that she was complicit in the earlier fraud, we'll amend our complaint accordingly. By the time I left Eleanor's office, the initial legal wheels were in motion. The emergency injunction would be filed by the end of day, temporarily halting any transfer of property. Eleanor had also connected me with a forensic accountant who would help trace the movement of my trust funds over the past 17 years. As I drove home still, my home at least temporarily, my phone erupted with notifications. 3 missed calls from my father, 2 from my mother, and a text from Melissa. You need to stop being dramatic and accept that things change. Mom and Dad need the money from the house sale for their retirement. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I silenced my phone, focusing instead on the road ahead. For the first time in my adult life, I felt a strange sense of liberation. The perfect daughter, the responsible one, the family caretaker, those roles had been shattered by betrayal. In their place stood someone new, a woman determined to seek justice even against those she had loved most deeply. Back at the house, I noticed a sleek black BMW parked across the street that hadn't been there before. As I approached my front door, a woman in a tailored suit emerged from the vehicle. Jessica Palmer, she called, striding toward me with confident steps. I'm Vanessa Clark, your sister's real estate agent. I understand you'll be vacating the property soon. I was hoping to take some preliminary measurements and photos for the listing. I stood taller, channeling Eleanor's professional confidence. Actually, Miss Clark, there's been a change of plans. This property is now subject to legal proceedings, and no preparations for sale can proceed until those are resolved. I suggest you contact my sister and advise her to consult with her attorney. Vanessa's polished smile faltered. I was told the sale was proceeding immediately. You were misinformed, I replied, unlocking my front door. Good day, Miss Clark. As I closed the door behind me, my phone buzzed again with an incoming call from my father. This time I answered. Jessica, he began, his voice tight with controlled anger. What exactly do you think you're doing? Melissa's agent just called, completely flustered. I'm protecting what's rightfully mine, I answered, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. And Dad, we need to talk about Grandma Eleanor's trust, the one you and Mom emptied without my knowledge or consent. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. When my father finally spoke, his voice had lost its authoritative edge. What are you talking about? I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. I found the documents in your filing cabinet, all of them, including Grandma's letter to me that you never delivered. Another long pause. Jessica, you're making a terrible mistake. Some things are more complicated than they appear. I agree, I replied, which is why I've retained legal counsel to help sort through these complications. I suggest you do the same. Goodbye, Dad. As I ended the call, my hands were shaking, but not from fear. For the first time in my relationship with my parents, I had claimed my power. The road ahead would be difficult and painful, but it would be my road, not the path they had manipulated me into following for all these years. Outside, the sun was setting behind the maple trees. I had planted a decade ago, trees I had never expected to see reach maturity. Perhaps now I would. 3 days after filing the emergency injunction, I received notice that the court had granted a temporary freeze on any property transfer. Eleanor had successfully argued that the circumstances, my decade of mortgage payments, the recently discovered fraud regarding my grandmother's trust, and the sudden attempt to sell the house warranted judicial intervention, pending a full hearing. The news triggered an immediate response from my family. My mother called in tears, my father sent threatening texts about destroying the family, and Melissa launched a social media campaign portraying herself as the victim of her mentally unstable older sister. Former high school acquaintances began messaging me concerned about Melissa's claims that I was having a breakdown and fabricating wild accusations against our loving parents. This is fairly standard, Eleanor reassured me during our follow-up meeting. When people are caught in wrongdoing, especially family members, they often try to discredit the person exposing them. The good news is, documents don't lie, and we have plenty of those. The forensic accountant Eleanor had recommended Martin Goldstein had already traced significant portions of my trust fund. The money had initially been transferred to a joint account in my parents' names, then dispersed to fund the down payments on their Florida retirement home and several of the investment properties I'd discovered in my father's files. Essentially, Martin explained, showing me a complex flowchart on his tablet. They used your inheritance as seed money for their real estate ventures. Based on my calculations, if the original $175,000 had remained in the conservatively managed trust your grandmother established, it would be worth approximately $310,000 today. However, if we calculate what your parents gained from using those funds as leverage for their property investments, the figure climbs to nearly $500,000. The numbers made me dizzy. $500,000 that should have been mine, money that could have paid for my education, purchased a home outright or funded, the business I'd always dreamed of starting but never had the capital to launch. We'll include all of this in our demands, Eleanor noted, adding Martin's report to her growing file. Now about the upcoming family meeting. I had been dreading this next step, but Eleanor insisted it was necessary. Rather than proceeding directly to court, she had proposed a mediated meeting between all parties and their legal representatives. Such meetings often led to settlements, avoiding the time expense and public exposure of a trial. I can't face them, I admitted, my confident facade crumbling momentarily. Not all at once. Eleanor squeezed my hand gently. You can and you will, but you won't be alone. I'll be right beside you, and so will the truth. Remember, Jessica, they're the ones who should be afraid of this meeting, not you. The meeting was scheduled for the following Saturday at Eleanor's office. My parents flew in from Florida, and Melissa drove up from New York, where she'd been staying since her Los Angeles career had proven less successful than her Instagram suggested. Each arrived with their own attorney, my parents with a stern man named Richard Bentley, who specialized in estate planning, and Melissa with a young lawyer who seemed overwhelmed by the situation. The conference room felt charged with tension as we all took our seats. My parents avoided eye contact while Melissa glared openly, her manicured nails tapping an agitated rhythm on the polished table. Eleanor opened the meeting with clinical precision. We're here today to address several serious matters involving the Palmer family. First, the misappropriation of funds from Jessica Palmer's trust, established by Eleanor Palmer Sr. in 2009. Second, the decade-long arrangement regarding the family home at 247 Maple Street, where Jessica has been making mortgage payments with the understanding of eventual ownership. And third, the recent attempt to sell said property without consideration of Jessica's financial contributions. My father's attorney immediately objected. These allegations are outrageous. My clients have always acted in the best interests of their family. Any financial arrangements were informal family matters, not intended to be legally binding. Informal Eleanor raised an eyebrow, sliding copies of the trust documents across the table. I'd hardly call a legally established trust with notarized signatures informal, nor would I characterize forgery of a beneficiary's signature as a family matter. The district attorney would likely term it differently. The mention of criminal charges visibly shook my parents. My mother's carefully maintained composure faltered, and my father's face reddened. "We never meant to hurt Jessica," my mother interjected, her voice quavering. "We were going through financial difficulties after the 2008 recession. The money was only borrowed temporarily. For 17 years, I found my voice steadier than I expected. And you never mentioned it to me, not once, even as I worked multiple jobs to pay for college, even as I took on student loans." My father cleared his throat. "The investments we made benefited the entire family. We've always intended to make things right. By evicting me from the house I've paid for, I challenged, emboldened by Eleanor's supportive presence. By giving it to Melissa as an investment property, Melissa rolled her eyes dramatically. Oh, please. You've been living in a nice house for a decade while I've been struggling in a tiny apartment. You've always had it easier." The absurdity of her statement ignited something in me. "Easier, I've paid over $200 0-inches mortgage payments and another $45 0-inches renovations. Meanwhile, Mom and Dad paid for your entire college education, your car, and according to these bank statements," I nodded toward Martin's report, "they've been sending you monthly allowances of $2,000 from accounts funded, partially by my stolen inheritance." Melissa blanched, looking quickly at our parents. What is she talking about? A telling moment of silence followed, confirming my suspicion that Melissa hadn't known the full story. Her lawyer whispered urgently in her ear. Eleanor seized the opportunity. "Here's what's going to happen. We have clear evidence of fraud, misappropriation of trust funds, and unjust enrichment. Jessica has been making payments on a house she was promised would be hers. We're prepared to file both civil and criminal charges if necessary." My father's attorney leaned forward. "What exactly are you proposing?" Instead, Eleanor laid out our terms: immediate transfer of the house to my name, reimbursement of the trust fund with appropriate interest and compensation for legal fees. The alternative was protracted litigation and potential criminal charges. My parents' attorney requested a private consultation with his clients. As they left the room, Melissa remained looking shell-shocked. "Did you know I asked her directly?" "About Grandma's trust fund." She shook her head slowly. "No. I swear, Jess. They told me they'd been saving for years to help me with the house purchase. They said you'd agreed to move out because you were planning to relocate anyway." I didn't know whether to believe her, but the confusion in her eyes seemed genuine. When my parents returned 30 minutes later, their demeanor had changed completely. Gone was the self-righteous indignation, replaced by the look of people who realized they'd been cornered. "We're prepared to transfer the house to Jessica immediately," my father's attorney stated. Regarding the trust fund, my clients propose a payment plan. "Full amount within 30 days, Eleanor countered firmly. "Or we proceed with all available legal remedies." After another hour of negotiation, we reached an agreement. I would receive the house free and clear, plus $450, 0 inches compensation for the misappropriated trust. My parents would avoid criminal charges, but the settlement would significantly impact their retirement plans. Melissa, upon learning the full extent of our parents' duplicity, withdrew her claim to the house. As we prepared to leave, my mother approached me tentatively. "Jessica, we never meant for things to go this far. We thought we were making sound financial decisions for everyone." I looked at the woman who had raised me, taught me right from wrong, and then betrayed those very principles. "The problem, Mom, is that you made those decisions with my money, without my knowledge while watching me struggle." That wasn't your right. Outside Eleanor's office, an unexpected scene awaited me. Melissa stood by her car, visibly distressed. "Can we talk?" she asked hesitantly. "Just us," I nodded, and we walked to a nearby park, both of us silent until we reached a bench overlooking a small pond. "I didn't know, Jess. About any of it," she began, tears streaming down her face. "I mean, I knew I was the favorite, that they helped me more financially, but I had no idea about Grandma's trust, or that you'd been paying the mortgage all these years. They told me they were letting you live there rent-free while they continued making payments. The revelation stunned me. So all these years, they've been lying to both of us," she finished, "just in different ways." For the first time in our adult lives, my sister and I truly saw each other, not as rivals or as the roles we'd been assigned by our parents, but as fellow victims of a complex deception. "I don't want the house," she said quietly. "I never did. It was their idea. They said they needed to sell it because their investments hadn't performed well, and I was just helping them out." I studied her face, seeing genuine remorse. "What will you do now?" I asked. Melissa sighed deeply. "I don't know. Start over, I guess." My PR career in LA was a bust. I've been working as a barista and pretending online that I was successful because I couldn't admit failure after they'd invested so much in me. I was coming back east anyway, that part was true. As the setting sun cast long shadows across the park, my sister and I began a real conversation for the first time in our adult lives. The family we thought we had was built on manipulation and lies, but perhaps from the wreckage, something more authentic could emerge. I think about that moment often, when you realize a relationship that defined you can be both broken beyond repair and transformed into something new. As I sat with my sister, beginning the slow process of rebuilding trust, I wondered, would you stay to watch what happens next in our family's story? If this journey through betrayal and redemption speaks to you, hit that like button and subscribe to see the surprising developments that followed this family confrontation. Sometimes, the deepest wounds lead to the most unexpected healing. The weeks following the settlement agreement brought a strange mixture of relief, grief, and disorientation. Legally, I had won everything. I sought ownership of the house, financial compensation, and accountability for the betrayal. Emotionally, however, I found myself adrift, questioning every childhood memory and family narrative through the lens of new knowledge. Had my parents' displays of affection been genuine or merely manipulations to ensure my continued compliance? Had their pride in my achievements been real, or was I valued only for my usefulness? The foundation of my identity, the responsible daughter, the family caretaker, had been built on lies. Who was I without those roles? "This is normal, Dr. Winters," my newly acquired therapist assured me during our second session. A calm woman with kind eyes and directness, I appreciated she specialized in helping people recover from family betrayal. You're experiencing a form of grief, mourning the family you thought you had. It's similar to bereavement, but complicated by the fact that the people you're grieving are still alive, just fundamentally different from who you believed them to be. My parents had returned to Florida immediately after the settlement, maintaining minimal contact except through their attorney. The formal transfer of the house into my name proceeded without further drama, though I received occasional texts from my mother expressing vague regrets without specific acknowledgement of wrongdoing. "I just want you to know we love you," one message read. "We hope someday you'll understand we did what we thought was best." I didn't respond. Dr. Winters had suggested establishing clear boundaries while I processed my feelings, and engaging in my parents' attempts to minimize their actions would only impede my healing. Melissa surprisingly became a more consistent presence in my life. Having broken her lease in Los Angeles, she needed temporary housing while she figured out her next steps. After much consideration, I offered her the spare bedroom in what was now legally my house. "Are you sure?" she asked when I made the offer, her expression guarded. "After everything that happened, I'm not doing it for them," I clarified. "I'm doing it because I think we both deserve a chance to know each other as adults without our parents' manipulation between us." Living with my sister revealed how little we truly knew each other. Growing up 5 years apart, we had inhabited different worlds, even within the same household. Now sharing morning coffee and evening meals, we slowly discovered commonalities and differences that had nothing to do with our assigned family roles. Melissa was funnier than I'd realized, with a dry wit that emerged once she stopped performing the role of the golden child. She was also struggling with deep-seated insecurities masked by her carefully curated social media presence. "I was never as confident as you thought," she admitted one evening as we sorted through old family photographs. "You always seemed so sure of yourself, so capable. Mom and Dad constantly compared me to you, not openly, but in little comments. Jessica would have gotten an A on this," or "Jessica never gave us this much trouble." I felt like I could never measure up, so I stopped trying. "That's wild," I laughed without humor, "because they were always telling me how I should be more like you, more social, more outgoing, more normal." "Divide and conquer," Melissa observed. Classic manipulation tactic. The settlement money arrived 30 days after our mediation as agreed. $450,000 transferred into my account, a life-changing sum that represented both restitution and possibility. After consulting with a financial advisor, I allocated the funds carefully, $42,000 to pay off my remaining student loans, $75,000 for additional home improvements, including a much-needed new HVAC system, $100,000 into retirement accounts, and the remainder into a diversified investment portfolio. For the first time in my adult life, I felt financially secure. The persistent anxiety that had accompanied every purchase, every bill, began to fade. I started sleeping through the night without waking to check my bank balance on my phone at 3 a.m. My career took an unexpected turn as well. The confidence I gained from standing up to my parents translated into assertiveness at work. When a senior management position opened at my accounting firm, I applied despite not meeting all the listed qualifications. To my surprise, I was selected. "Your presentation showed initiative and strategic thinking we haven't seen from you before," my new director commented during the offer meeting. What changed? I considered the question carefully. "I stopped underestimating myself," I replied simply. Melissa found employment at a small marketing agency in town, starting in an entry-level position, but quickly proving her value. Her expertise in social media, previously used primarily for self-promotion, translated well to professional applications. For the first time, she was building a career based on genuine skill rather than parental expectations or appearances. Our parents remained in Florida, creating a new narrative about the family rupture. Through mutual acquaintances, we heard they were telling friends that I had legal technicalities to steal their retirement funds, portraying themselves as victims of an ungrateful daughter. Melissa received occasional calls attempting to draw her back into their orbit, usually coupled with offers of financial assistance if she would come to her senses and distance herself from me. They haven't learned anything. Melissa sighed after one such call, showing me the text messages that followed. They're still trying to pit us against each other. Are you tempted? I asked honestly. To go back to how things were, she thought for a moment. Sometimes it would be easier in some ways. But I don't think I can unsee what I've seen, you know? It's like in the Matrix, once you take the red pill, you can't go back to the illusion. 6 months after the settlement, our maternal grandmother's sister, our great-aunt Margaret, contacted me out of the blue. In her 80s and still sharp as a tack, she had heard through family channels about the dispute over Grandma Eleanor's trust. Eleanor would be proud of you, she told me over tea in her assisted living apartment. She always worried about how Robert and Sharon managed money, especially after that pyramid scheme fiasco in the 90 seconds. Pyramid scheme? I echoed, realizing there were still family secrets I hadn't uncovered. Aunt Margaret nodded, adding another piece to the puzzle of my parents' financial history. Your father lost nearly $50, 0 inches, a multi-level marketing scheme before you were born. Your grandmother helped bail them out, but she was never confident they'd learn their lesson. That's why she set up your trust the way she did, to protect at least some money from their control. The conversation with Aunt Margaret led to regular visits and a relationship I treasured. Through her, I connected with family history, untainted by my parents' revisionism, learning about my grandmother's strength, wisdom, and the values she had hoped would be passed down to me. Your grandmother wanted you to be financially independent, Aunt Margaret explained. She saw how your parents' money habits created instability in your childhood, even if you didn't notice it at the time. The trust was her way of ensuring you'd have options. Options exactly what I now had, thanks to the truth finally coming to light. As winter turned to spring, both Melissa and I continued our individual healing journeys while nurturing our newfound sisterhood. The house that had been the center of so much conflict slowly transformed into a genuine home, filled with honesty and mutual support instead of competition and secrets. Almost a year to the day after the family confrontation, an unexpected email arrived from my father. The subject line read simply, "We need to talk." The message was brief. "Jessica, your mother and I are coming to Massachusetts next weekend. The Florida property is being foreclosed. We've made some poor investment decisions and need your help. Family should help family regardless of past disagreements. We can discuss details when we arrive. We assume we can stay at the house until we sort things out. Dad." I stared at the screen, a familiar knot forming in my stomach, the automatic response to my parents' manipulations that I'd spent months in therapy trying to untangle. I forwarded the email to Melissa, who was at work, adding only, "They're back." Her response came within minutes. Classic. "Financial crisis equals time to manipulate Jessica. What are you going to do?" It was a good question. The old Jessica would have immediately arranged accommodations, emptied her savings to help them, and resumed the caretaker role without question. The person I'd become over the past year recognized this for what it was, another attempt to exploit my sense of responsibility. I consulted with Dr. Winters during our regular session, sharing both the email and my conflicted feelings. "What do you want to do?" she asked, her standard response to situations where I needed to exercise my own judgment rather than seeking external validation. Part of me wants to ignore them completely, I admitted. Another part feels guilty for even considering that. And a small, maybe petty part wants them to face the consequences of their actions for once. Those are all valid feelings, she affirmed. The question is, what boundaries do you need to establish for your own well-being? After careful consideration, I crafted a response. Dad, I'm sorry to hear about your financial difficulties. I cannot offer housing or financial assistance at this time. If you'd like to meet for lunch during your visit to discuss rebuilding our relationship, I'm open to that conversation. I suggest the Westfield Cafe on Saturday at 1 p.m. Please confirm if this works for you. Jessica. My father's reply arrived within hours, his anger evident even in text form. This is how you treat your parents in their time of need. After everything we've done for you, I'm disappointed in your selfishness. We raised you better than this. I didn't respond. 3 days later, another email arrived, this time from my mother, her tone softer but equally manipulative. Jessica, darling, I know things have been difficult between us, but we're facing a genuine crisis. Your father's health isn't good. The stress of these financial problems has caused his blood pressure to spike dangerously. We have nowhere else to turn. Surely you can find it in your heart to help us for just a little while. Melissa read this message over my shoulder as I sat at the kitchen island. Wow, she said. They really haven't changed at all, have they? Same tactics, different day. I almost fell for it, I admitted. The health concern especially. That's Dad's go-to move, Melissa confirmed. Remember when I wanted to study abroad in college? Suddenly his heart was acting up and the doctor was concerned. I maintained my boundary, reiterating my willingness to meet at the cafe, but nothing more. Eventually, my father agreed to the meeting, though. His message made it clear he considered this a major concession on his part. The day of the meeting arrived cold and rainy, matching my apprehension. Melissa offered to accompany me, but I declined. This was a conversation I needed to have alone. I arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early, selecting a table by the window where I could watch for their arrival. At precisely 1 p.m., I saw their rental car pull into the parking lot. They sat inside for several minutes, seemingly arguing before finally emerging. My mother looked thinner than I remembered, my father more stooped. Age and stress had marked them both in the year since our confrontation. As they entered the cafe and spotted me, my mother's face crumpled with emotion, while my father maintained his stern expression. They approached my table, my mother immediately attempting to hug me, while my father stood awkwardly aside. I allowed the brief embrace, but remained seated, gesturing for them to take the chairs opposite me. You look well, my mother, began after an uncomfortable silence. The house must be… Let's skip the small talk, my father interrupted. We're in serious trouble, Jessica. The Florida property is underwater. We took out a second mortgage to invest in a promising development opportunity that fell through. The bank is foreclosing in 30 days. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. I'm sorry to hear that. What are your plans? My father looked taken aback, clearly expecting a different response. Our plans? Well, that's why we're here. We need a place to stay while we sort things out. The house has plenty of room. That's not possible, I stated firmly. Melissa and I are living there now, and it's not an option for you to stay with us. My mother's eyes filled with tears. But where will we go? We have nowhere else. There are extended stay hotels, I suggested practically, or apartment rentals with short-term leases. We can't afford those options, my father snapped. That's the whole point. I took a deep breath, centering myself. What happened to the money from selling the other investment properties? According to the documents I found, there were several besides the Florida house. My parents exchanged a quick glance that confirmed my suspicion there was more to the story. We've had some additional financial setbacks, my father admitted reluctantly. Investments that didn't perform as expected. Translation: they had continued their pattern of poor financial decisions and were now facing the consequences. For perhaps the first time in their lives, there was no safety net, no inheritance to appropriate, no daughter's finances to exploit. I'm not in a position to offer financial assistance, I said clearly, but I can help you research affordable housing options and connect you with resources for financial counseling. My father's face darkened. So that's it. After everything we've done for you, you're just going to abandon us. The old guilt tactics. Once they would have worked instantly. Now I recognize them for what they were. Everything you've done for me, I repeated, keeping my voice level. Like stealing my inheritance. Like letting me pay your mortgage for a decade while planning to sell the house out from under me. That kind of everything. That's ancient history now. My mother interjected, reaching across the side table for my hand. I pulled back slightly, maintaining my boundary. We've all made mistakes. But family forgives Jessica. Family sticks together. I agree that family should support each other, I replied carefully. But support doesn't mean enabling harmful patterns or sacrificing my own well-being. I'm willing to rebuild a relationship with both of you, but it needs to be based on honesty and mutual respect. Respect, my father scoffed. Is this what respect looks like to you? Turning your back on us when we need you most? I remained calm, though my heart was racing. I'm not turning my back on you. I'm offering to help in ways that are healthy for all of us. But I won't compromise the boundaries I've established this past year. The conversation circled for another 40 minutes, my parents alternating between guilt trips, minimizing their past actions, and increasingly desperate appeals. Eventually realizing I wouldn't budge on the housing issue, they shifted tactics. We just need a loan, my father said, his voice softer now. $50,000 would get us through this crisis. You'd be helping your own parents avoid homelessness. I can't do that, I replied genuinely, sorry for their situation, but firm in my resolution. Based on our history, I don't believe a loan would be repaid, and I'm not willing to strain our healing relationship with financial entanglements. As our meeting concluded, my mother embraced me again, whispering, "We're still your parents, Jessica? Nothing changes that?" My father shook my hand stiffly, his disappointment evident in every line of his face. Watching them leave, I felt a complex mixture of emotions, sadness for what our relationship could have been, relief at maintaining my boundaries, and a surprising sense of peace. For the first time, I had faced my parents not as the dutiful daughter seeking approval, but as an adult with clear limits and self-respect. Later that evening, as Melissa and I shared dinner, I recounted the meeting. "They haven't changed," I concluded. "Not really. Did you expect them to?" she asked gently. I guess part of me hoped they might have reflected on their actions, come to some realizations. Melissa nodded thoughtfully. People rarely change unless they acknowledge there's something to change. They're still blaming circumstances, bad luck, everyone but themselves. What will happen to them? I wondered aloud. They'll figure something out, Melissa replied with surprising confidence. They always do. The difference is, it won't be at our expense this time. She was right, of course. 2 weeks later, we learned through a mutual acquaintance that our parents had moved in with old friends in North Carolina. My father had secured a part-time consulting position, and my mother was selling homemade preserves at local markets. They were downsizing, adjusting to a simpler lifestyle, doing exactly what they could have done without attempting to manipulate me. As spring bloomed fully around our home, I realized something important. Maintaining boundaries wasn't just about protecting myself from harm. Sometimes it was also about giving others the opportunity to grow by facing their own challenges. 2 years passed, seasons changing life, evolving in ways I couldn't have predicted on that day. I found the eviction notice on my door. The house, once a symbol of betrayal and conflict, had transformed into a true sanctuary, partly because of the physical renovations Melissa and I had completed together, but more significantly because of the emotional renovation we'd undertaken in ourselves and our relationship. Melissa had flourished at the marketing agency recently, being promoted to creative director. Her Instagram, once filled with carefully curated falsehoods, now showcased her authentic life, professional achievements, occasional setbacks, and genuine connections. She had started dating Sam, a kind-hearted landscape architect who appreciated her humor and resilience. My own career had similarly blossomed. The confidence I'd gained through standing up for myself extended to my professional life. I had leveraged my senior management position to propose and lead a new division focused on financial literacy and planning for young professionals work that felt meaningful and aligned with my values. Contact with our parents remained minimal. Occasional text messages, a brief phone call on major holidays. They had settled permanently in North Carolina, adapting to a more modest lifestyle than they'd envisioned for retirement. From mutual connections, we heard they had joined a church community and made new friends, though they still occasionally portrayed themselves as victims of their ungrateful elder daughter when speaking to distant relatives. I had come to peace with this narrative. Their perception of me was no longer the defining factor in my self-worth or identity. Dr. Winters had helped me understand that some relationships can only heal to a certain extent, and that's okay. On a crisp autumn morning, almost exactly 3 years after discovering my grandmother's trust documents, I received a letter from Aunt Margaret's attorney. My great-aunt had passed peacefully in her sleep, and to my surprise, had named me the executor of her estate and primary beneficiary. She admired your courage, the attorney explained when I met with him. She told me you reminded her of your grandmother, not just in appearance, but in spirit. Beyond the emotional significance, Aunt Margaret had left me her entire estate valued at approximately $320,000. The inheritance came with a single condition outlined in a personal letter she had prepared before her death. My dearest Jessica, if you're reading this, I've finally gone to join your grandmother and all those who went before us. Don't be sad for me at 89. I've had a full life and am ready for whatever comes next. I'm leaving you my savings and investments with one request: use some portion of it to establish a trust for educational purposes. Whether for future generations of our family or for deserving students who lack financial support, I trust your judgment completely. Your grandmother believed education was the path to true independence, and I share that conviction. The rest is yours to use as you see fit. Unlike your previous inheritance, this one comes with no secrets or complications, just the love of an old woman who has watched you transform adversity into strength. Be happy, my dear. Find joy in the life you've built on your own terms. With all my love, Aunt Margaret, her final gift wasn't just financial, it was the opportunity to create something meaningful from our family's complicated legacy. After careful consideration and consultation with Eleanor, who had become a friend, as well as my attorney, I established the Eleanor Palmer Educational Trust, dedicated to providing scholarships for students who had overcome significant family challenges. The first recipient was a brilliant young woman whose parents had died when she was 16, leaving her to navigate college applications and financial aid forms alone. When I called to inform her of the scholarship, her tearful gratitude reminded me of my grandmother's original intention to provide options and independence to the next generation. Melissa fully supported the foundation, even donating her graphic design services to create the logo and website. It's like we're rewriting our family story, she observed, as we reviewed applications together, taking what was broken and creating something better. On the 3rd anniversary of finding the trust documents, Melissa and I decided to host a small dinner party at our home, now truly ours, in every sense. We invited friends who had supported us through the difficult years, including Eleanor and Dr. Winters. The autumn evening was perfect, cool enough for the fireplace, but warm enough to enjoy dessert on the back patio beneath strings of soft lights. As conversations flowed around me, I took a moment to step into the kitchen alone, overwhelmed by gratitude for the life I now lived. The betrayal that had initially seemed like the end of my world had actually been the beginning of something authentic and meaningful. The kitchen phone rang, interrupting my reflection. I answered to hear my father's voice, our first direct communication in months. "Jessica," he began, his tone uncharacteristically hesitant. "Your mother and I heard about the educational trust you established. It's a good thing you're doing." I leaned against the counter, surprised by this unexpected acknowledgement. "Thank you." It felt right, honoring Grandma's original intention. A pause followed, filled with all the things we still couldn't say to each other. Then, "We made mistakes, Jessica. Serious ones. I won't ask for forgiveness that I haven't earned, but I want you to know that I recognize what we did was wrong." It wasn't a full apology, not really, but it was the closest my father had ever come to acknowledging responsibility for his actions. Perhaps in his own way, he was trying to change to grow, however imperfectly. "I appreciate that," I replied, choosing my words carefully. "Maybe someday we can talk more about it." "I'd like that," he said quietly. "When you're ready." As I rejoined the gathering, Melissa caught my eye, raising a questioning eyebrow at my expression. I gave her a small smile and a nod, silently communicating that I was okay. Later, I would tell her about our father's call and what it might mean for our family's future. For now, I wanted to fully inhabit this moment of celebration. Sam raised his glass for a toast. "To Jessica and Melissa," he began, "who taught me that family isn't just about blood or shared history. It's about choosing to support each other's growth and happiness day after day." As glasses clinked around the table, I looked at the faces of these people who had become my chosen family. The path that had brought me here was nothing like I'd imagined, filled with betrayal and pain I wouldn't have chosen. Yet the destination, this life of authenticity, purpose, and genuine connection, was more fulfilling than anything I could have envisioned while living according to others' expectations. Sometimes the deepest wounds create space for the most profound healing. My parents' betrayal had forced me to confront difficult truths, but in doing so had freed me to build a life aligned with my own values rather than those imposed upon me. The house that was meant to be my prison of obligation had become a sanctuary of choice. As the evening drew to a close and our guests departed, Melissa and I stood on the front porch, watching the autumn leaves dance in the gentle breeze. "Would you change it?" she asked suddenly. "If you could go back and never find those documents, never know the truth, would you choose that easier path?" I considered her question seriously, watching the maple trees I'd planted a decade ago swaying in the moonlight. "No," I said finally. The truth was painful, but it was also liberating. I needed to see clearly to build something real. Melissa nodded, understanding completely. "From betrayal to belonging," she mused. "That's our story." It was indeed our story, a narrative we'd reclaimed from those who had tried to write it for us. And although the chapters had contained more heartbreak than I'd ever anticipated, the ending was one I could embrace with my whole heart. If you've ever experienced family betrayal or had to redefine your relationships on your own terms, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. This journey has taught me that sharing our experiences helps others feel less alone in their struggles. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to my channel for more authentic family stories, and share with someone who might need to hear that healing is possible even after the deepest betrayals. Thank you for being part of my healing journey, and remember, sometimes life's greatest challenges lead to our most meaningful transformations.